Well, we've often spoken on this show about the long march through the institutions. That's this idea that our public services, our government departments are now infested with hardcore neo-Marxist left-wing thinking, often disguised as kind of touchy-feely programs like diversity and inclusion, unconscious bias, white privilege, all this stuff. Well, we've talked about it a lot, but our so-called liberal government has done nothing whatsoever. But one man who has decided to tackle the long march through the institutions head-on in America did so 3 weeks ago, and wow, it worked. Donald Trump watched him on Tucker Carlson, listened and acted. If only we could see similar things here. I'm delighted to welcome exclusively to Outsiders, Christopher Rufo. He is a researcher at the Discovery Institute and a contributing editor to City Journal, and he joins Outsiders now. Christopher Rufo, welcome to Outsiders.
Great to be with you.
Well, you've had an incredible few weeks. Now take us back to your studies about what you label critical race theory, and tell us what that is, what you discovered about it, and then tell us how Donald Trump reacted.
Yeah, well, critical race theory has been a huge concern for people, especially on the right, in the last few years. But what I did was I actually took an angle of it as an investigative reporter, and I handled leaked documents from hundreds of sources in the federal government and state governments and local governments, exposing exactly what's going on in these critical race theory trainings, where white employees are denounced for their whiteness. They're forced in some cases to write letters of apology. And as I unearthed these documents, I went on this journey that was a 90-day sprint, where I was releasing document after document after document, building the case against this, exposing it to light. And I explicitly called on the president to take action. And to my kind of great surprise and joy, within 72 hours, he'd issued an executive memo saying that no more of this stuff throughout the federal government.
Well, that's phenomenal, Christopher, and well done and congratulations. And as I say, I wish we could see that sort of action in Australia. But take us through exactly what critical race theory is and how it was being implemented in government departments, particularly the Justice Department and others, scientific communities, the military.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most explosive stories that I did was on the Sandia National Laboratories, which designs America's nuclear arsenal. They had sent employees on a 3-day white male re-education camp where it was restricted and segregated on the basis of race and sex. And they were told that white male culture is analogous to the KKK, to MAGA hats, to mass killings, to white supremacy. They were forced to kind of deconstruct their own identity, their white male culture, denounce themselves publicly, and then at the end of the session, write letters of apology to women and people of color for no greater reason than their inborn characteristics. And these are programs that have essentially spread everywhere throughout the federal government, and they're predicated on a single idea. America and Western countries are inherently and irredeemably racist, and all of our social institutions, from the Constitution to the legal system, to the nuclear family, are a mere smokescreen for white supremacy, and they want nothing less than to destroy the United States, destroy the West, and to do it from the inside out, and even more kind of brazenly and astonishingly, they want to do so with funding from taxpayers, and thankfully the president put a hard stop to all that.
Rita.
Critical race theory, it's not only a morally and intellectually vacuous doctrine, but it's also dangerous. Can you take us through some of the similarities it has with white supremacy and the sort of toxic racist ideas that we thought we left behind?
Yeah, if you look at history, both in England and the United States, at the turn of the last century, so 100 years ago, there was the kind of scientific racism that was en vogue at the time, where it did three things. It reduced people to a racial essence. It created a racial hierarchy and often segregated, and then engaged in a campaign of racial harassment. And the great irony is that the critical race theorists, the so-called kind of woke social justice warriors, are doing the exact same things today. They're reducing people to a racial essence, either whiteness or blackness. They're creating a new racial hierarchy. saying that people can be judged based on their group identity characteristics. And then in critical race theory training sessions and then on the streets of American cities, they're engaged in targeted racial harassment. And, it's very simple. This stuff was wrong 100 years ago. It's wrong today. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum is enforcing it. I'm going to fight against it, and all right-thinking and honorable people should join me in denouncing this kind of stuff and making sure that we don't go backwards in our history.
James.
Christopher, a lot of what you described, these almost Maoist struggle sessions that people have to do over the very color of their skin, this would sound like it would constitute, to borrow a term from our friends in Human Resources Department, a hostile workplace environment. I'm wondering about what Trump's move against government departments has done. Does it also extend to contractors, big corporations that are serving the U.S. government, and will their HR departments also be forbidden from doing these sorts of things? Because we know that the private sector, it's just as bad, if not worse in many cases, where these kind of woke HR types have taken over and pushed this kind of ideology on the workplace.
That's exactly what it does. And really, it's the kind of ambition of the order was astonishing. He abolished it in the government directly under his control. He abolished it in the military, which is essential. But he also said very clearly in this order, if you are a company, and this includes the majority of Fortune 500 companies in America, that does business with the federal government, you can no longer use these critical race theory principles anywhere in your corporation. So he sent HR departments immediately scrambling. And I think he's using all of the leverage and the mechanisms of power in his capacity to do it. And there's another point that I think is critical. He instructed the Attorney General of the United States to assess whether these kind of trainings that are either segregated by race, targeting people by race, denigrating people by race or gender, constitute a form of toxic work environment or workplace harassment, which would be a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So he's opened a lot of different avenues to fight this. And I think it's important for conservatives to realize we cannot fight this ideology simply by writing an op-ed in the Sunday paper. We're going to have to get down into the trenches and fight this out. We're going to have to use legal mechanisms, investigative reporting mechanisms, persuasion mechanisms, lawsuits, and executive action, because it won't stop unless we make it stop. I think that's the biggest lesson of the last 3 weeks.
Well, Christopher, you're absolutely right there. And in Australia, we've had our own, the head of the public service in Australia insisted everyone do what is called unconscious bias training. Every public servant, every civil servant in Australia does this unconscious bias training. Now, they use words like this and diversity and inclusion, but Christopher, you've done so much research on this. Can you just explain to our viewers how these innocuous-sounding words, diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias, privilege, what they really disguise and just how pernicious they are?
Yeah, critical race theory in general is really a kind of neo-Marxist formulation. What they've done is they've taken the kind of old Marxist dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed, but starting 100 years ago and accelerating the last 20 years, they've realized that the kind of old school economic Marxism has never made a strong inroads in the West, in the Anglo countries and American society, because we have too strong of a middle class. So what they decided to do really with the Frankfurt School is they tried to basically graft identity politics onto the Marxist dichotomy because they thought that this would be a more subtle weapon, a more effective weapon, a more insidious weapon. And that's exactly how it works. What you're describing is really kind of cult indoctrination 101. What they do is they describe a problem. They say there's unconscious bias, white privilege, internalized white supremacy. And they say you have this problem even if you don't know it, even if your behavior doesn't reflect it. And then they offer a solution, anti-racism, that's both an individual solution and a kind of global solution. But then this is where the real kind of trick is. They take it as a kind of excuse to abuse you, to try to reshape your psychology from the inside out, and try to manipulate you through kind of emotional guilt techniques to always be moving forward to their commands, no matter what you've done or what you'll do in the future. And people who have studied struggle sessions in China, in the 1960s, people who have studied kind of religious cult indoctrinations have made these comparisons very directly. They follow the same techniques and principles, and it has certainly no place in our public institutions.
Rita.
What's your advice to people working in the public or private sector who are being bullied by this sort of ideology, and they feel like their job is in jeopardy if they speak up, or their career progression. What's your advice to those people, the ones who don't have a voice?
Yeah, if you don't have a voice, find someone that can speak on your behalf. And I've been doing that in the United States. I know that there are many great people in Australia that have been fighting this fight as well. But I would say that the trick, what I found to be the highest leverage, I'm one person, but I've just kind of made a major victory on this, because what I did was I found specific examples that would be deeply offensive to 95% or more of the public. So what I would encourage those people to do, if you are in a public agency in Australia, leak specific documents and emails and PDFs and resources to friendly media that can get that out there, expose it to the public, because let's be honest, critical race theory is an idea that can only survive in the shadows. Once you expose it with the light of the public spotlight, it will immediately crumble because it's weak intellectually, it's bankrupt morally, and all it's going to take is some courage and people that are going to push to get it out of our institution.
James.
What do you think? What's going to happen, though, with the universities? It seems to me that higher education is kind of the engine room that's stoking this and feeding this fire, even if, you try and tamp it out in the government and in the private corporations. Where do you go with the universities? Is that the next step, or what do you do about that sector churning out more and more people who are schooled and believe this cult-like critical race theory belief?
Well, in a sense, it's their greatest strength, but it's also their greatest weakness. The large majority of critical race theory advocates and activists and professors and researchers are funded by the public. And if you are funded by the public with a change in political leadership and a little courage, you can be defunded by the public. And the executive order from President Trump does exactly that. He says, no more federal grants supporting anything involving critical race theory. So he's really cut off the supply lines for this theoretical research. And I think we could even go a step further. And I'd like to see some more actions, specifically legal actions, that this constitutes a form of workplace harassment. And we can really use all of the mechanisms of the public good. Because, let's face it, if the public dollars created this, the public dollars can take it away. So I think that the hope is not lost. I think that it really just takes someone willing to make a decision. And for so long, we've been scared of being called racist or white supremacist or whatever, that we've kind of been cowed into not speaking. But those words have lost all of their rhetorical power as they've been abused and applied to everything. Math is white supremacist, logic is white supremacist. I don't think we should be afraid of these words anymore. And we have to know that we are both on the morally and intellectually superior position, and we need to act accordingly.
Christopher Rufo, what an absolute legend you are. History will look back at you as one of the first to hold up your hand and say, stop to the long march through the institutions. We owe you a favour. The Western world owes you a favour, mate. Well done. And Donald Trump, well done for listening to Christopher Rufo. If only our leaders here, you never know, they might do the same. Thanks, Christopher Rufo, so much for being here on Outsiders.
Thank you.